Hi Pam, thanks for the talk. I work for Facebook, so I was listening with a lot of attention. One thing you said about auditing is really interesting, because I don't think that by design we log enough information about models which we tend to train in real time, so that if you ask me, on Thursday 4 p.m. 2 weeks ago, the model made a certain prediction, and now I want to debug that, I may or may not be able to, to help. Is this something that people are thinking about as well, sort of designing models so that you can audit?
Yes, it is a huge topic. I don't know how many models you go through, but anyone who's busy is going through a lot of models and making a lot of decisions. So there is a lot of discussion about this. And there's the European, the GDPR, because there is a whole statistical issue there now, that has really sparked the conversation. So I have not met anyone yet who's got this right, but there's a lot of conversation about this. And as I said, the GDPR, being a large economic jurisdiction, has really kicked this off. But thank you, it's a great question. Perhaps you'll help come up with the answers.
Hi, Tom Dietrich again. Can you say a bit more about outliers? I'm not sure what you mean in this context.
So in my head, when I'm thinking about outliers, I'm thinking about just the really noisy data points. So in some models, noisy data points are just noisy data points. But from my context, from my point of view in biometrics, outliers are typically faces which either scan poorly, or a multimodal biometric which has an error in it, or in some cases, there's just not enough scans of that particular individual's face to compare it to. So you say,
I'm not recognized then by the system.
Correct. So you end up in biometrics, it's called just being in the long tail. That's just the term of art for that particular field. And the long tail in biometrics is really long and robust. So if you're in that long tail, and let's say that you're trying to go through an airport, and maybe you're a child and you've never traveled before, you might be in that tail. And depending on where you're flying from and to, and in what political context, it may be very problematic. You may be detained. You may not be able to travel. This has happened.
But that would be if I was recognized as someone else. If I just show up as empty, then I presumably have to provide some other form of identification. So I'm inconvenienced. There's no question about it.
Actually, that doesn't always happen that way. If you're in the long tail, in certain political contexts, you are not allowed to travel. So it depends on what political jurisdiction you're talking about. So it really gets dicey. So the long tail is a really important, actually, human rights problem, and it affects individuals. It's
interesting because it's also a huge threat to the validity of biometric systems in the sense that, I can't remember the number, 2 or 3% of us do not make fingerprints. And
Correct.
So that means that, if you want to defeat these systems, there's a path to follow.
Oh, absolutely.
And,
yes. The Ishikawa diagram, the fishbone model, there are really good steps to defeating a biometric system. You have to really protect the biometric templates, and there are all sorts of things you need to do. And that's why there's so many multimodal biometrics, because of the... but yes.
So the real question here then is better biometrics from your perspective?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And there's a really good new set of research that shortened the tail by using some really beautiful convolutional neural network work. It is very, very beautifully done. And he did shorten the tail. It's not perfect, but it's better. So I'll take that, yes.
So Arthur Gretton. So I have a question about the trade-off between auditing algorithms and privacy. So these days, the algorithms are the data. Right. If you have access to the algorithms, you have a window on the data, which is much more granular than otherwise. So I guess my question is whether you might, in perhaps mandating auditing of algorithms, you might get sort of a communications data act on steroids where you have a very granular and extreme view of everybody's lives. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your question. I do think that's a huge problem. So, that's why I was mentioning is the algorithm the factor. When you look at the older laws, you do not see any language about the algorithm being a factor. Ed, maybe you've scoured that and have seen it. I've never personally seen it. But the fact that algorithms are factors is a very big deal, as you have correctly pointed out. I do not have the answer for that. And your analysis is spot on. I agree it's a problem. And yes, it's a really complicated one too. Yes.
Adrian Weller, thanks very much. I was particularly interested in what you had to say about the issues of fair credit. I hadn't appreciated all those details, and I think it's a very interesting history we can try to learn from in thinking about best practice going forward. And specifically, you mentioned that you're interested in new measures of transparency. I wondered if you could elaborate on that, please.
Okay, so the old measures of transparency, I think there are some really good things there that are definitely doable now. I think they're hard. But for example, one thing is, what is the context for the data set? This is a simple thing. So in fair credit reporting, we know the context for the data set is very limited. It is the credit bureau report. It's a limited data set, which can grow, of course, depending on how many credit transactions you have, but it's held by typically limited entities, the credit bureaus, and which are legally defined. So is there a way that we can find a pathway to define the parameters of the data we're relying on? This is very challenging. And I understand all the problems with it, and you probably have even more problems you could add to it. But I think in certain simpler models or simpler applications of models, I think it's doable, and I'd like to see some testing of that. So for example, even though advertising has complex models, some of the applications like, okay, are you going to show this person the red car or the blue car? What's the data set that was based on? What vendors, what collections of data? Do you see where I'm going with it? What aggregations of data types are they using? I think that might be the extrapolation. So that's one thing. But the other thing is remedies. Remedies is part of transparency. So if there's a problem, who do you talk to about this problem? Who does an individual affected by a poor outcome, who do they talk to? Do they know who to talk to? So how might we make that clear? If we can't provide the data, can we provide a pathway to talk to someone? Is it possible? I don't know that it always will be, but is it maybe possible? Can we do that? These are questions. I don't have all the answers, but thank you.
I really liked your point that it's a question of when rather than if many of these things start to happen. Having spent time in the UK speaking with credit bureaus, with retailers, and with civil servants to try to help begin to educate policymakers about how the regulatory environment might need to shift to take these things into account. I just wondered, it would be interesting to get your thoughts on how you see that happening in the U.S. So in other words, how do you move past all of the challenges that you identified and begin to start a dialogue with policymakers and regulators to help make a clear path for things that I think eventually can benefit consumers? I mean, there's a lot of potential here to benefit consumers, but it obviously needs to be done very carefully. So what do the concrete next steps look like there?
Okay, so for me, a concrete next step is dialogue with experts. I know that that's not pushing it down the road. It's an actual concrete next step. But a second concrete next step is to have a reality-based understanding. So a lot of the dialogue in the US and to some degree in Europe is what I call the just say no approach to policy and technology, which is, oh, there's a new technology. No! You know, this is ineffective. So how can we look at the technological flow and say, okay, here it is. We're going to deal with it. How can we make it so that we preserve autonomy and fair information principles and privacy? How can we do that? So that's the conversation.
It's about bringing together, so by articulating the principles, bringing policymakers together with the experts to figure out how you read past the technology that respects the principles.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. You articulated it beautifully. And the principles they're in the flow. They shift a little bit, but you can really see it across. The principles don't change that much. I am concerned with discussion of black boxes and kill switches on robots. Someone asked me, what do you think about, having a kill switch on robots? I'm like, you don't need a kill switch. You just need a 2x4. Just stick it right in front of the robot and it's all done, And it's just, we're not there yet. It's not the right talk to have right now. So I think a big part of the answer is redirecting the conversation to reality and to really try to have what I would call a very neutral, fact-based attitude toward the entire thing.
Actually, my question was almost the same, but I'm not sure I like your answer. I think I'd like to have a more precise answer. Let me give you an example, right? So today I have a device in my home, which is Alexa, which may be listening. I actually have no idea what it's doing, right? Maybe actually taking all the audio and sending it to Alexa and save it for the rest of the end of time. I assume it's not the case, but I don't quite know, actually. I don't know for sure, right? I pretend. So what's the next step? I mean, is it self-regulation? Is it a government actor that comes in and comes with a common sense regulation? I mean, what will be concretely the next step to change that? Because right now it's the Wild West, right?
So I have to tell you a story. So I did not have an Alexa until about 2 weeks ago. It just did not appeal to me, and I had no need for it in my life. I have, in our office, we have a test of all the Internet of Things. I don't have an Internet of Things car yet. I'm going to have to borrow one and test that too. But I went to the Consumer Electronics Show. I've gone there for 20 years. But this year, it just blew my socks off. And that doesn't happen very often. So I went and I looked at a refrigerator. The refrigerator was imbued with the Alexa system. And then I looked at the Ford Fusion. It has Alexa. And then I went to Philips Lighting. It had Alexa. I'm like, wow, Amazon ate everyone's lunch. They just ate it. And people just watched them. And I thought, I have to go get an Alexa and do research on it. So I know more now, thank heavens, so I can answer your question. Your question is actually really hard, because really the question you're asking isn't a machine learning question. You're asking a question about the autonomy and the kind of the fair information practices and things that are bigger than the actual machine learning that's driving Alexa. So if you really think about Alexa, you're not having a problem with the AI, correct?
No, it's really the data collection and knowing.
It's the surrounding issues. So, we don't need to talk about all the parameters of what Alexa is doing, but here's the problem I have, what I would call the third-party doctrine. So when we set our data flowing in through a funnel that's going up to a really large, cloud system, such as Amazon, and connected with financial data and other data, we really do set up a beautiful aggregation point for all of our data and for profiling. Now, this is where people will really have differing views of what they want for privacy. And it is up to the individual. But I would really like to live in a society where the individual has that choice. Right now, we don't have a lot of choice about that. You can remove data cards from Alexa, but it degrades performance substantially. You should try it if you want to. You'll have to reset your Alexa, though, just warning you. I've already been there, done that. So it's really tough. And then once the data's there, guess what? There is no Fair Credit Reporting Act, right, for Alexa data. It's really, really, really hard. This is unregulated data. So if you are in Europe, this is regulated data. But if you are in the US, this is unregulated data. If you're in India, this is unregulated. If you're in Japan, unregulated. It depends on where you are and what economic jurisdiction is, you're afforded with. There's another question, though, or another response I can give to you. I'm very interested in edge computing. Machine learning has really enhanced edge computing. I don't know why more people don't talk about the architecture. So if you look at, for example, Qualcomm's Snapdragon OS, the Snapdragon OS is busy doing individual neurons on the cells and whatnot, or the little data capillaries, are really small processors, and they're just not sending data to the cloud. They're sending bits and creating aggregates, basically screenshots of the data. It's very privacy preserving, and it's actually security preserving as well. So edge computing, I think, is a partial answer to you. We're not going to see edge computing with Alexa, I don't think, though. That's a third-party doctrine problem. And that's a really big societal problem. But I do think there is an architecture. I do think edge is a potential solution for a lot, maybe not a lot, a middling amount of privacy concerns, and I'd love to see it deployed more. I know that's a really diffuse answer to your focused question. I apologize for that, but that's as close as I can get.